The Henderson family set out on a road trip early one summer morning. The minivan was packed tight with suitcases, snacks, and enough games to keep their two children, Mia and Liam, entertained. The family was headed to a rustic lodge in upstate New York to visit Uncle Rob, a reclusive but kind-hearted man who always had fascinating stories to tell. The trip promised relaxation and adventure. What it delivered, however, was far beyond anything they could have imagined. As they drove through the rolling hills, a storm began to brew. The once blue sky turned a sickly gray, and sheets of rain hammered the windshield. David, the father, gripped the steering wheel tightly as visibility shrank to mere feet. Emily, his wife, tried to keep the kids calm in the back seat. "Dad, what's that up ahead?" Mia suddenly piped up, pointing through the rain-streaked window. David squinted, noticing a figure standing on the shoulder of the desolate highway. The person was drenched, their clothes clinging to their frame, waving weakly for help. Against his better judgment, David pulled over. The man looked to be in his late 30s, with sharp, piercing eyes and a calm demeanor that seemed unaffected by the storm. He introduced himself as Eli and thanked them for stopping. He said his car had broken down a few miles back, and he needed a ride to the next town. Despite Emily's unease, the Hendersons invited Eli into the car. He spoke little during the drive, offering vague answers about where he was headed. Yet his presence wasn't unsettling. There was something almost reassuring about him. The storm raged on, and as suddenly as it had begun, it ceased. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the landscape. "That's my stop," Eli said, pointing to an empty rest area up ahead. David pulled in, and Eli stepped out. The family watched him walk away until he disappeared into the trees. The rest of the trip was uneventful until they pulled into a gas station a few hours later. David stepped out to refuel, and Emily took the kids inside to grab snacks. As David glanced toward the road, he froze. There, leaning against a lamppost, was Eli. David rubbed his eyes, certain he was mistaken. Eli looked up and gave him a nod. Before David could say anything, Emily and the kids returned, and when David looked back, the man was gone. By the time they reached their motel for the night, David had dismissed the sighting as a trick of his mind. But when Emily opened the door to their room, she gasped. A single chair in the corner faced the bed. On the seat was a drenched scarf, the same one Eli had been wearing. "Maybe he's staying here too," Emily suggested weakly, but her voice wavered. The next day, the sightings grew more frequent. At a roadside diner, Eli sat in a booth near the back, sipping coffee and watching them as they ate. On a scenic overlook, he stood silently by the guardrail, staring at the horizon. The family was growing paranoid. Mia and Liam began to ask if they were being followed, and Emily couldn't hide her unease. David tried to rationalize it, insisting it was just someone who looked like Eli, but his voice lacked conviction. When they finally reached Uncle Rob's lodge at dusk, the entire family felt on edge. The warm light spilling from the windows and Rob's familiar figure standing on the porch was a welcome sight. "About time you got here," Rob called out, his voice booming. The family climbed out of the car, relieved to have arrived safely. As they approached the porch, however, the relief turned to shock. Rob wasn't smiling. His face was calm, his sharp eyes piercing in the twilight. "Eli," David whispered, his voice trembling. Rob grinned, though it wasn't his usual warm smile. "I prefer Eli these days," he said, his tone eerily familiar. Over dinner, the conversation was tense. Rob, or Eli, as he now insisted they call him, seemed to know everything about their journey. He recounted details only someone in the car could have known. The snacks the kids ate, the music they played, the storm they drove through. "Why are you doing this?" Emily finally asked, her voice quaking. Eli tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "You invited me in?" he said simply, as if that explained everything. The rest of the night passed in silence. When the family awoke the next morning, Rob, or Eli, was gone. The lodge was empty, the car out front, but the man they had come to visit had vanished without a trace. The Hendersons left that morning, their hearts heavy with questions. On the road back home, they couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. And every now and then, in the reflection of the rearview mirror, David thought he caught a glimpse of a familiar, piercing gaze.